When it comes to JoJo's, Jolyne and Pucci share one of the strongest dualities in the series, a duality that is rooted in two incompatible truths about human nature. They are the literal mirrors of one another, the perfect foil to each other, greatly embodying a philosophical conflict that brings about the end of the original JoJo universe, while simultaneously birthing the existence of a brand new one. To delve into what makes Jolyne and Pucci's duality so special, let's first start with where it all began for our main protagonist and antagonist of Stone Ocean. One of the main themes surrounding Pucci and Jolyne's duality is uncertainty versus certainty. With Pucci, his worldview on a surface level is very simple, but also very extreme when you understand the nuance behind it. On the surface level, it comes from human suffering, which to him comes from regret of the past and fear for the future. Pucci develops this fear due to the failure of protecting the one person that he cared about the most, which was his younger sister, who instead died due to him trying to separate her from his younger twin brother. Weather report, as the two had a very questionable relationship. Because of these events, instead of Pucci taking accountability for what he did and reflecting on what he could have done differently, he instead becomes in denial, developing the fear of the unknown, blaming it on the forces of fate, and also comes up with the solution to eliminate the uncertainty that caused him the pain in the first place, and ultimately this becomes the driving force behind his motivation within the story, not just for himself but also for humanity in general. To Pucci, this is heaven. It's his idea of peace. However, what he creates is not peace. It is just inevitability without agency, a world where you cannot change your own fate or grow as a person, which is a great contrast to Jolyne Cujoh, who shows the contradiction in Pucci's worldview. With Jolyne, her life actually begins in direct opposition to Pucci's ideal world, as she is falsely accused, imprisoned, isolated, and stripped of control over her own life. If Pucci's worldview is correct and absolute, then she should have collapsed under the uncertainty, as she has no idea of what her future will look like. But she doesn't. Instead, she adapts. Her growth is something that not even Pucci himself can fathom, and this is shown in their first fight, because his belief of this isn't just due to how he chose to perceive Jolyne, but it's also rooted in the idea that when one reaches their breaking point, then they should and would naturally collapse under it and accept that they cannot fight against the invincible force, which is fate itself, despite the fact that he went through something similar to Jolyne. Like Jolyne, Pucci also focuses on his inner character to solve problems, which also shows the contradictory nature in Pucci's worldview, because like when Jolyne was motivated to rescue her father and escape the Green Dolphin Street prison, Pucci also chose to do something about his situation regarding his sister and create his own motivation from the experience. The loss of his own sister, while tragic, was caused by his own hands, and instead of learning from his mistakes, considering alternative methods first before doing what he did and accepting the uncertain nature of the world in order to adapt, Pucci instead seeks to remove the concept of uncertainty altogether, which also removes the nature of humanity as well, which is another major part of their duality and one that we see reflected in their stands. With Whitesnake, it represents Pucci's first solution to human suffering, which is that if identity causes one pain, then their identity is something that should be detached, and they should only be seen as a cog in the machine and nothing more. This is conveyed through Whitesnake's ability to turn a person's memories into discs, along with stands as well. which ultimately is very dehumanizing, even for a stand as well, because with a stand it is literally the manifestation of one's own soul, yet when turned into a disc it is just a mere object. This greatly feeds into the idea that to Pucci a human being is just a system of components and not a living, breathing creature with their own private memories and feelings. This isn't just how he sees other people, but also himself. We can see this in the way that he chooses to separate himself from Whitesnake. The stand does his talking for him, while Pucci just stays in the background, hidden and anonymous. But Stone Free exists as the complete antithesis of all this. So with Stone Free, it literally unravels Jolyne's body into threads, yet it never breaks her sense of self. Through Jolyne's character arc, Stone Free represents adaptability and endless possibilities for growth, without completely disregarding one's old identity, but instead evolving it. This helped Jolyne a lot through her journey, compared to the beginning of where she was in denial about her situation, while in contrast, Pucci still is. However, for him, it later turns into complete delusion that can also be seen as a representation within Whitesnake's ability to create illusions. Now, obviously, delusions and illusions are not the same thing. However, the connection between illusions and delusions is that both are errors in how the brain processes reality. They represent a breakdown in perception, but they exist on different points of the same cognitive spectrum. And it's because of this delusion that Pucci fails to realize that the very same invisible forces that he vows to oppose and protect from humanity are the same forces that he's using to initiate his plans, which is greatly represented with his use of Sea Moon and Made in Heaven. With Sea Moon, it represents a distorted and unnatural reality where Pucci sits as the center of gravity, meaning that everyone and the world around him bends to his very will, showing how much Pucci has strayed away from humanity at this point in story. Now, there isn't much of a parallel between Sea Moon and Stone Free, especially when compared to Made in Heaven and Whitesnake. However, I do think that Sea Moon's ability to turn the world into something that obeys a single center of control does a good job of contrasting the idea that even under a distorted reality, through Stone Ocean, Jolyne can still adapt without needing control over said reality as well. And then there is Made in Heaven, which is Pucci's worldview and life's work manifested into basically one of the most powerful stands to ever exist. With Made in Heaven's power, time is accelerated until the universe reaches a state where every moment is already known in advance. It's a world where nothing can surprise you, as you basically are not deviated from your fated path or actions, nor are they unknown to you anymore, meaning that even if things do go wrong for you, you'll basically be aware of them beforehand. As a result, Made in Heaven allows Pucci control over existence and fate itself, a universe where everything is known to everyone beforehand, which in Pucci's eyes becomes a universe without suffering. But it all goes back to what I was saying earlier. Pucci's idea of heaven is just inevitability without agency. It removes an important part of the human experience, and it's this core idea that Made in Heaven embodies that is greatly contrasted by Stone Free, which is an existence that is defined by choices that are made under uncertainty. Jolyne does not gain certainty when she hits rock bottom, even when Jojo steps into the picture. In fact, the complete opposite. But even as the story progresses, Jolyne never gives up. She is instead resilient and steeled in her resolve to leave the prison and rescue her father. Despite all of it, she still chooses to move forward, and what Stone Free embodies through Jolyne as well is that willingness to face the uncertainty and come out of it on top, even if the odds are stacked against you, and even if fate may very well be against you as well. Another thing that I want to delve into regarding the duality of these two is how they approach ego in shared community, as it quietly defines the full contrast between them. I'll start with Pucci, who in his earlier life as a priest was shown to be very kind, welcoming and emotionally open, not just to his sister but almost everyone that he met. He was someone who created a place to belong for others with the church that he worked in, representing community through guidance, trust and shared meaning. But over time that changed. After meeting Dio, Pucci slowly begins to change for the worst. We first see this with how he handled the situation with separating Weather Report and his sister, and how he began to later internalize a different worldview after losing his sister due to his own actions. It turned him cold and it enforced him to work for Dio. However, it is important to understand that Pucci did not simply serve Dio, as he wasn't just another minion just like Vanilla Ice or the Derby brothers. Instead, he would eventually become a friend to Dio, someone that Dio genuinely saw as his equal, and it's because of this friendship with Dio that would basically become a catalyst for Pucci's transformation into someone that believed he had understood reality better than everyone else, and that his worldview was absolute. Once Pucci adopts the idea of heaven with Dio's help, his identity slowly shifts into someone who no longer sees himself as a part of humanity, but instead above it. By the time he reaches Made in Heaven, his ego has fully transformed into that of a godlike figure, both literally and figuratively. Pucci does not claim to be a god, which is natural as that would go against what it means to be a priest. However, he still positions himself as the necessary force that defines how reality should be for everyone else, showing that over time he had developed a god complex, while sacrificing all of his great qualities along the way, not just as a priest but as a human being as well, one that used to give out unconditional love but then later wants to reserve it for his idea of heaven. As a result, Pucci, without even realizing it, becomes similar to his mentor and close friend, as he also starts to see everyone else around him as expendable, manipulating them to help fuel his ambitions. This development for Pucci regarding ego and shared community is greatly contrasted with Jolyne, who goes through something similar but in reverse. At the start of her story, she is shown to be very selfish, emotionally isolated and very disconnected from responsibility. As we see in her backstory, her early life reflects a lot of antisocial behavior that involved causing trouble for other people because of a fractured relationship regarding her family, especially with her dad. Because of this, she had a very hard time trusting people because of having no stable community to belong to, and even when she did have connections, they usually were with people that were either very untrustworthy or just downright shady. But unlike Pucci, she does not retreat inward permanently, because as the story progresses, she begins to trust others, rely on teamwork, build bonds and even accept responsibility beyond herself. Allies such as Foo Fighters and Weather Report are not just companions to her but also extensions of her developing sense of belonging. Jolyne does not just replace her ego with self-denial, instead she expands it into something more shared, something more sacred. She does grow to not only be more kind and humble, but also less self-centered, and develops a small community of friends and allies that she calls her own, and she sticks with them until the very end. Thanks to her development and growth, Jolyne's ego became something more positive to the point where she attracted others to her, allowing her to build the one thing that Pucci lost during his story, a community, but also the ability to build one because of his own ego becoming worse over time, which I think shows a great contrast in character growth between the two, especially when you realize just how how much these growth arcs are represented in how subtly their appearances change as the story moves forward. Pucci goes from looking like an ordinary priest to more of a god figure, while Jolyne goes from looking like this soft and frail girl to a woman that's become a tough and hardened warrior ready for anything. I also love how the catalyst for their respective growth arcs are greatly influenced by the main antagonist and protagonist of JoJo's Part 3. With Jolyne, it's Jolyne Cujoh, and for Pucci, it is Dio Brando. Not only are Jolyne and Pucci both greatly influenced by these respective icons in terms of their character journeys and motivations, but they also each carry on the torch that they left behind. With Pucci, it is fulfilling the Heaven plan and defeating the Joestars after Dio's death, and with Jolyne, it is defeating Pucci and saving the world. In the end, both characters die, with Pucci nearly succeeding, but despite the power of his maiden heaven, he doesn't, which was inevitable because of the failed ideology that he operated under. Not because it was illogical, but because it fundamentally fails to understand the true value of human nature. What defines human nature isn't certainty or always knowing the answers to our problems, but instead how we can adapt and respond to them in order to move forward. Pucci tries to build a world without uncertainty and call it heaven, a gift to humanity as he likes to call it, but in doing so he removes the very thing that makes our choices and growth possible, but also worth it. Jolyne does the opposite. She accepts the uncertainty and moves forward anyway, which in the end leads to her entrusting all of her hopes and dreams into Emporio. And in the end, it is not destiny that defeats Pucci, but reality itself in its simplest and most uncontrollable form, which is the weather. Probably one of the most unpredictable things that exist in this bizarre world that we live in. It is the very embodiment of uncertainty itself. Pucci tried to have dominion over it time and time again, only to ironically lose to it through his final standoff with Weather Report and Emporio, showing that Jolyne's sacrifice through embracing that uncertainty was not in vain, which puts a thematic end not just to Stone Ocean's story, but also the duality of Jolyne Cujoh and Enrico Pucci. But what do you guys think? What do you think of the duality of Pucci and Jolyne? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video and found it to be very informative, then please be sure to leave a like as well. Subscribe to the channel for more JoJo's Bizarre Adventure related content. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is your boy MAMZYY signing out. Take care and peace.